in there. And if there isn't something, I usually talk to you for about a half hour or so and get to know you a little better. What are your skills and interests? And then we talk amongst the board and we'll try to make something work for you. Maybe there's something that we haven't even thought about. So I think that's all I have to say about that, Chris. So
Okay. Well, so it's exciting for me to introduce Michael Papanek. He is Kurt Lewin's Kurt Lewin is his grandfather. And it's hard for me to believe that, but Kurt Lewin is your grandfather, and you've been a practitioner since 1992. A recent book, From Breakdown to Breakthrough, which talks about your work in Silicon Valley, and just a privilege to have you here, Michael. So please take it away.
Okay, everybody can hear me and see me. Hey, I may have accidentally either requested somebody to turn on their video or turn off. I didn't realize that he had made me a host. So if you got some weird message, ignore it. That was me trying to do something else. How's everybody doing today?
Great.
Great. Let me ask you to do this in chat. So I have no idea, we have a range of people here today, from people, who have forgotten more about Lewin than I'll ever know. We've got some pretty heavy experts here on the call, to people that may have never even heard about him or here for whatever reason. They're in the wrong meeting but decided to stay. I have no idea. So answer this question the best you can, including I don't know. Who is Kurt Lewin to you? So just some phrase or answer. What if somebody said, who's Kurt Lewin? Put that in the chat, please. And hopefully we can all see chat live as it goes here. Yeah. And by the way, we're recording. I noticed, Chris. I'm sure that's fine with everybody. That's great. Yeah. Oh, my hero. Yeah, there's the freezing and the unfreezing. There it is. Professional HR certification. Yeah. Some random news. That's true too. All right, awesome. Yes, I just wandered in to get out of the cold, I think is what Eric, that's the classic answer, which Lewin would appreciate. Founder of T Groups, yep. So already just in the chat, you're starting to see some things, right? Something about change for sure. Some about something called OD. Again, this group probably could, each person give me 3 definitions of what OD is. They'd all be right. Some about professional HR, just some guy, T groups, what's a T group, a heavyweight for which we are grateful. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And for me, it's kind of a little bit of a personal journey. So today is going to be a little less academic, maybe in some ways. And we can provide, you can all provide as much academic. We can keep pace with that however we want, but it's also going to be about who he was as a person. My mother called him father, as a woman born and raised in Berlin might refer to her father as father. And kind of my journey to who he was and why he did what he did. Yeah, an activator and a hope of a beloved community. So this, I really appreciate that, Jules. So that's kind of the very next thing I'm about to say. So who he is to me, and his life experiences to me animate what we all do. That's just speaking for myself. But when you do what you do, is today a weekday? If you work today, you probably did something, if nothing else, to try to make the world better for your clients and your colleagues, which Lewin believed in deeply. That what we were up to was not theoretical. And what we were up to was practical. The practical theorist is sort of a nickname for him because of a famous book. But why practical? What practical meant to him was life and death. What practical meant to him was the impact we have in the world around us. That's what's important. And this was at a time where a lot of science was not really interested in that. These people weren't our clients. They were our subjects at that point. They were a subject of an experiment. maybe, ultimately to help people. But Lewin began with helping people, as many of you already know, with the idea of action learning, about that we fix our own problems. So I'm going to give you kind of a very intimate kind of overview of some of the things that happened to my family, to his family, a little bit about me and my mom, who I honor also with these presentations, who was a female psychologist in a time when that was a tough thing to be in some ways, in the academic world of universities and such. And then we'll talk about how his systems, his thinking, connects to our thinking now. So to me, if we're successful today, you'll come away with, hopefully, I'm going to say, a little dose of inspiration, a little dose of connection to being part of a movement that began so long ago in the 1930s. But you'll also have maybe a bit of a more practitioner's point of view, as, you know, where is the depth of this stuff? If I dig, if I start sawing into the wood, this is not veneer, this is hardwood. What's underneath there that animates what we do? So if that sounds good, that's what we're going to do. Let me share my screen here. There we go. As far as process goes, we're certainly going to save a lot of time for just a pretty wide open kind of Q&A, but I certainly would be interested in any comments or questions along the way. So we're going to keep it interactive. All right. So, and there's that legacy word. So thank you, Vanessa, for thinking about that word legacy. Einstein said, if I did anything, you'll check me on the quote, somebody I know, but I believe this is Einstein, who said, if I achieved everything, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants. And so I think Kurt Lewin would say that, and I think maybe he's a giant that all of us can stand on his shoulders as well. So who was he? What happened in Germany before and during World War II? What did he discover at that time? How was that received? This idea of thinking about groups and relationships, social change, and then what's the connection and the inspiration between today? So I think that's what we're trying to do. And I'm also following off here on my own notes. And we are going to, hopefully, and I'm watching time, of course, we're going to have time to show you some kind of rare movies and some things that we're just digitizing and getting out there. So I'm going to give you kind of a lot of my favorite photos. So this is one of my favorite photos of Kurt Lewin on the left there, or I guess all of our left. And then there he is with Eleanor Roosevelt. I have another picture with him with Margaret Mead in the Grand Canyon, 1929. So he came to the United States a few times, as you'll hear in a minute, before the Holocaust and escaping Germany permanently. And then introduce you to my mom. So again, Kurt Lewin was known as father in my house as a kid, me growing up. He was my other grandfather. My father's side was alive, but Kurt Lewin was dead when I was born and died when my mother was a teenager. And then how many people, wave your hands or something if you know who Edie and Charlie Seashore? Anybody know the Seashores? Obviously the Crosbys do, some others. So again, a lot of Lewinians, right? And there are, both Edie and Charlie passed away after I started doing this presentation. The Lewin Center has interviewed my mother extensively. There's great video out there. So let's talk about who he was, since some don't have any idea. I'm actually, yeah. So he was born September 9th, 1809, and came to the US in 1933. He spoke no English when he came here. My mother used to tell a story that he was trying to invite a student to a meeting about goops. He kept saying goops, goops, goops. He meant groups, groups. So the fact that he had this impact, he died of a heart attack at age 57 in 1947, was here about 13, 14 years. His second wife was my Nana, right? Was my grandmother, who was alive. So Kurt Lewin's second wife was alive for many, many years till I was a young man. So all he was to me really growing up was this figure that I knew was vaguely famous. I'm just a kid growing up, and my mother's a psychology professor. My father is an MD psychiatrist. So it's a wonder I'm not crazy, or maybe I am, being raised in such a family. But he was just father, and there were pictures, and, you know, my mom was a college professor and, you know, didn't get tenure one day and was upset. You know, I'm just a little kid. I don't know that. Then over the years, in my 20s and 30s, I started to know a little bit about who he was, but I kind of, you know, I told you I was raised by all these psychologists and psychiatrists on my father's side. His mother was one of the first women to graduate from the medical school in Vienna. My father was born in Vienna, my mother in Berlin. And so it wasn't until I got a lot older and I started to actually do large scale IT implementations. So I was going to be a computer guy. I was going to stay away from humans and the family business, and I was going to write code. But then the success or failure of my ability to do a large IT project was, of course, as you would predict, all about the decision making and the agreement building and the strategy. And, you know, we build what we thought they want, but it's not what they want, and so forth. And so I started to get much more interested in, well, how do we make decisions? And how do we deal with disagreements? And how do we deal with change? Because every good IT project should be a change effort, right? And so I kind of got pulled back. And then luckily, my mom lived many years and with her faculties, which she didn't have before she died, but she went around the world speaking about Lewin, and I and her were very lucky. I was very lucky to have some amazing conversations about her. She would, with her about Lewin. She would help me deal with the problems in Silicon Valley. I would help her deal with the problems in academia. So let's see. Yeah. So when, you know, the things that I knew about him that were big, just basic values in my family were humor and service and the value of human life. And so I was raised with that to begin with. And a lot of that came from obviously both sides. He never wrote a textbook. He wrote like crazy, but never wrote a textbook. He never had a formal psychology professor job in the United States. But he was at Cornell, he was at University of Iowa, MIT, after leaving Germany to escape the Nazis. And it's that experience that drove a lot of what we're going to talk about. We like to say he put the science in social science. So at a lot of people at that time kind of felt like a lot of people were just very informed guesses. I wouldn't say Freud was just informed guesses, but the idea of testing with control groups and all of this in social science was kind of unheard of. And when he saw what he saw happened in World War II, and when he had his own experience in World War I, which is what we're going to talk about here, that's when he started to realize something else was going on that he could not explain. And there were many Gestalt psychologists, German Jews and non-Jews before and then after the war, who were motivated by what happened after World War II or after World War I, when Germany, as they described to me, the last thing anybody wanted was war ever again. And then somehow in 10 years, this completely changed. And the belief was that leadership was the reason, that it wasn't just conditioning, that something else is happening. And that's what Lewin wanted to answer. And he felt that prejudice, obviously as the victim of massive prejudice as a minority member, he was very interested in majority and minority relationships. And he believed that actually the individual who might be racist or not was not really the issue. The issue was the group, that racism and prejudice to that degree was a group phenomenon, not an individual phenomena, and had to be solved as a social issue. He loved America. He loved our informal culture. I wasn't there, but I've certainly talked with German people today who talk about the formality of Herr Professor, right? My mother used to talk about this a lot when she talked about father. He was very informal. He would ask the students what they thought. This was not done in the German academic system, you know, barely done today, I'm told. I'm joking, but the idea that he would have a sense of humor in an academic environment, that he would learn, that he would say, oh, well, that idea didn't work. Well, let's try the next, was really, you know, this is what made him sort of a heretic. of his time. So I like to say he was a rebel with a cause. And he believed democracy must be learned by every generation. And it must be learned by the leaders and the group members over and over. And I think we find this to be very true today. So here he is having a beer with a buddy. Now, he served in the war. He was the oldest of three brothers. There was one sister. And his next oldest brother, Fitz, died in World War I. And Gail, by the way, I did a little extra research on exactly how this happened, because you and I talked about this once. And he basically died by staying at his gun while others left. And this was, I found this in multiple references. And this was sometimes kind of a sacrifice that would normally be considered for the fatherland, for the Kaiser, whatever. This was the ultimate sacrifice one could make for one's country. We probably believe that here in the US, and they certainly believed it then. And so this caused his mother to believe that the Nazis wouldn't kill her and the rest of the family, even though they were Jewish. She said, well, I'm a Gold Star mother, she said.
Would you
So
say again
I
how
don't
he
have
died,
to
Michael?
leave. I'm sorry?
You said how he died again? How did he die?
He died staying at his guns to cover the escape of his fellow soldiers.
Okay.
Yes. And so when later, he finally, at great risk, Lewin went back very late and convinced his mother and his aunt, her sister, to go to Holland to escape the Nazis. But by then they were captured in Holland and they were murdered in the camps, which devastated him, devastated his whole family, echoes into my generation and my grandchildren, I think, sometimes. So let's get into a tiny bit of how the connection between these experiences affected. So if you've heard of Lewin, you probably, nobody put it in the chat, the world's field theory, but field theory is a huge part of what Lewin's about. So field theory is the belief that an individual's behavior is based not just on who they are, but the field or the environment they're in, the context, or what he called the life space or the field. And that in every life space or field, there are barriers between what we might want. There are things we want, which he called a positive balance or a positive goal or a desire. And then there are things we want to avoid. We might call those negative balances. And so our movement in the space is based on our relationship and how we perceive these barriers. So the person changes, the person has their own self, but they change based on the environment in the most almost dramatic way. And if you've ever said anything like culture eats change for life, you're quoting a field theory belief. So all the things that we say, when we say to the leaders, you need to have a vision, when we say we have a culture, when we go from one company to another, when we notice this huge difference, that's the field forces acting on us. And again, a lot of this language, I'm sure most of you have heard. And so the very beginning of this theory for Lewin was when he was an infantryman in World War I. And all of a sudden, what used to just be a bush or a tree was now a place for attack or defense. And that to a soldier, their actual reality was now different, that a tree was no longer a tree. It was a place I could hide or attack from. I could save my life, a tree or not. And so this was the idea of the power of the individual, of the environment on the individual. Again, the individual is not, let's say, excused. And so this comes up sometimes that people think, well, are we saying that, you know, I can sort of say, well, anything that happens, I blame the culture or something. I blame the environment. Lewin wouldn't go that far, but he did feel that Freud and a lot of the other explanations were insufficient when it came to explaining the kind of behavior we saw in the Holocaust. All these people that did these things, they couldn't be doing them because of some sort of inherent flaw in their upbringing. And that's where he said, this is not, again, conditioning, but it's something that happened to them. They weren't conditioned or grown this way to be evil. They became behaving this way based on leadership. So the leader owns the field. The leader is accountable for the field, is what Lewin says. Okay, I'm watching, yep, we're in good shape. I'm gonna go a little faster on some of this. So I have some, here's the family artifact time. So every time you got paid in World War I, you had to show your pay book. And so this is Lewin's paybook. And you see down the bottom here, it says religion. It's item 3, right? There's item 2, A, B, C, D, E, and then item 3 is religion. You can see Jude is put there. And he would have to show this every time. And he was in a Jewish brigade. And just for fun, in case anybody cares, here's the real thing. There's his actual paybook, which I still have. So sometimes people kind of have a little fun with this. So from World War I, I guess I'm very careful with it. Lewin's paybook. There's his signatures there. And so again, I have a lot of these artifacts. While I'm boring you with this, Kurt Lewin's slide rule, actually a slide rule, just for fun there. A note from my mother saying this slide rule belonged to grandfather Kurt Lewin, 1890 to 1947, to Michael with love, Mom. So there's Kurt Lewin's slide rule. Anyway, little family time there. So again, he was married a first time, then married a second time. So now again, the woman next to Kurt Lewin's there on the far right. Woman next to him is Nana, my Nana that I grew up with. And then next to her is Lewin's older sister, Gerda Weiss Lewin, and her husband. And they passed away just recently. Okay, so we're going to take a look at some of these movies. So in the 1930s and late 20s and early 30s, Lewin used film. So again, this is kind of radical at the time. Obviously, moving film was certainly invented well before that, but it wasn't a tool used in social research much at all. And it's a little bit like his later invention, I like to say in quotes, of feedback. This idea of observing to learn, right? No research without action, no action without research. And so he liked to control. So he would take a certain activity with the same group, and then give the same group a different activity. And then he'd say, okay, let's do the same activity with a different group. He would change the observers. He would change the participants, all the normal things he would do, so that if one person said, oh, look, this is autocratic leadership, well, we'd actually control for those definitions and observations. That was much later in some of his work, but years before that, he started doing film. He liked to work with children because he felt like kids were much more accessible. If they were happy or sad or frustrated, it was obvious. And so you could see their experience of the field a lot more easily. So we're going to start here with, so I'm going to stop sharing that. And then we're going to share QuickTime. And then you should be seeing instead of an old blue impediments to performance. Oh, I'm sorry. That's the second one I want to show you. You see, to even change, you've got to stop and start again. Sorry about that. Hold on one sec.
This is awesome, Michael. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for filling in by saying something nice. That's very helpful.
True, it's going great.
All right, good. Thank you.
And I was going to say no worries.
There we go. Okay, so I think I must have, yeah, here we go. So that's, these are all relatives of mine, and I have notes from my mom as to who they are. But let me have the exact time for this. 2604, sorry. Why are they not? Oh, I'm sorry. Let me find. Okay, we'll go to the beginning. Ha, all right. Well, not the order I had in mind. Okay, so here's clearly an old movie. You can all see this. The little girl jumping. Okay, so what the heck with waves and Kurt Lewin? And so there's another clip. I've got this in reverse order. So my mother used to do presentations on Lewin, and she would talk about this idea of approach avoidance. And the Lewinians know about approach or approach avoidance, avoice avoidance. So this is about, again, the tension between goals and barriers. And sometimes we have to go through a negative valence to go to a positive one. So we have to have the discipline of losing weight to later have the positive experience of having lost weight. Waves are a classic example, and I use this with clients all the time because organizations have tons of approach avoidance problems, right? So what's fun about playing in the waves, if you've ever been a kid or you've got kids and you're on a beach like this, what's fun is the waves are interesting and exciting. And so we're back to perspective. So I go towards the wave because I'm attracted to it. It's a positive balance. And later there's a little video where Lewin put a little rubber duck in the wave, which we created a positive balance for the child. The problem is when you get close to the waves, they're scary. Your perspective changes, they look bigger, and so you run away. Okay, and there are things in all of our organizations that are like this. The issues that we'd like to resolve that are we're interested in resolving it. It's interesting or exciting or a pain we'd like to remove, so we go toward it, but then we get close, we freak out, we go back. And that's why, as Chris, you say you're going to teach a class on how to deal with employees in a more effective way. It's because I'm sure approach avoidance is one of the issues you're going to help the client fix. We got to deal with this thing. You know, we don't fire this person or do something. We've got to deal with it. So he had an old video of kids playing the waves. My mother used this video. That's me. So that's the fun I'm having today. That's my sister, Sue. And so just like Kurt Lewin has pictures of my mother and his first family and those children, in his videos, my mom used a little video of me, and I thought I had the time when that video starts. Okay, so this is some of this stuff. There's my dad, George Papanek, psychiatrist, as I was saying. So let's see here. So field theory. Make this a little bigger for everybody. Maybe I should have done that. So what Lewin would do is he would do these obviously films. And some of this is 16 millimeter, some is 35 millimeter. Most of this was discovered in 1970. So it had been in an archive in Germany for years and years, and was discovered and then restored. And then I had it, we had the actual digitation done now. So what he would do is he would, again, create barriers. Like you see the child here has this little fence, and then he might put the child on the outside and the toy they want on the inside and see the child go around. And the idea of restlessness was an unresolvable tension between these valences. And so you can see restlessness in a child in behaviors. I think there are also restlessness, if you will, behaviors in organizations that get displayed when we have this tension between what we want and a barrier. He would also put the child on the inside, the toy on the outside, and so forth. And so I'll show you some graphics in a moment that were one of the other breakthroughs for him, was this idea of visual representation of interpersonal dynamics. And so we do that a lot now. I certainly do it. I think most OD consultants do. We draw change. We draw agreements or decision-making models and frameworks. We do actual force field analysis. And so that's a similar thing there. And so I'm just going to show you a couple of moments of this one. This is wonderful, it's a bunch of ancient German guys discussing Lewin. And again, I'm not going to take the time to show all of these. I'm just looking for Hannah sitting on a stone. Here she is. So Hannah, you see, so the other thing we must say before we go much further, if we're talking about Lewin, is the word learning. So the other thing that was really radical about Lewin was how we learn, and that learning is a change, and learning and change happen together. And so he learned about learning. And one of the, I'll jump to an outcome of learning. There was a failure-based approach to learning when he was alive. You would punish people and they would be incorrect and you would have to correct them. And they would be motivated by what he called a failure approach to learning, or what Lewin. And so what would happen is people would withdraw or they would lower their expectations because of failure. What he believed was much more of a success learning, where we learn bit by bit by bit through success. And this totally changed how people learn. It was certainly radical at the time. So this idea of a conflict in the space. So there's my mother's cousin, my great cousin, Hannah, and she wants to sit on a stone. So her visual direction would be to look at her objective. Her positive balance is to face towards it like anybody would. I'm going to this thing. I want this thing. Problem is to put her bottom on it, she has to face away. And so she sits down on this inverted tub for the very first time, right? She manages to turn around and sit. And when Lewin sees, you see her stomping her feet. Lewin literally, and he did this with adult relationships and everything else, he called it joy. When we resolve these tensions and achieve the change we want, this was joy. And I still think in organizations, it's joy when we can finally, achieve something that we want. But for her, the conflict was she had to look away. So her direction, a positive direction, but negative visual direction versus physical direction. And the older child tries to help her and so forth. He demonstrates it. He says, see, now what is he doing? He's looking between his legs so that he can have visual direction and actual direction, physical direction be aligned. Okay. So what, right here? Let's stop sharing this one for a minute. So he shared this movie at the International Psychological Conference of 1929. This is a photo taken at the International Conference in 1929. Hold on. Okay, so this is all the psychologists that were at the International Festival meeting. Oh, I've got it upside down. That's funny. That's hilarious. Okay, no longer upside down. That's very Lewinian of me. There in my mother's handwriting is Kurt Lewin, second row from top. So there's Kurt right there. And anybody who was anybody in 1929 was at this thing. And there he is. Okay. So all the people who were there, he made this big presentation there in 1929, and it essentially blew everybody's mind and totally changed their whole view of learning and so forth. He was also criticized for using his children in experiments later. He's using children. All right, so it's just a couple more things we're going to talk about, and then we're going to go to questions. Excuse me. So let's go back to the little presentation. Excuse me. So waves on a beach, sitting on a stone. So relationship boundaries. So he came to America before he escaped to the United States. And he was obviously very interested in relationships, especially group relationships, especially between minority, what was called at the time, minority and majority relationships. So he did a lot of work when he came to the United States between African-American and white groups. And to this day, a lot of the things that a lot of people are trying to do to help with that issue or have some roots or a connection or certainly in alignment with a lot of what Lewin said. And one of the things that was the first very important to him was, well, what is the definition of a group? We might use the word team. What's the difference between a team and a group and so forth? And one of the main things that he found was that most people, and I think this is true today, define groups based on their similarity. We're all similar in some way. We have a similar attribute. We're all male or something, anything. We're all young, we're all managers. We're all work for a company, we're all Americans or something. But what Lewin said is, no, your membership in a group isn't based on similarity. It's based on shared interdependent of fate. So what if you share the outcome, then you're a member of that group. And unfortunately, the dramatic example of this was the definition of a Jew. So you might have never been to a synagogue in your life, but if the Nazis decided that your maternal grandmother was Jewish and that was enough, then you might be killed. And so your membership in a group really didn't mind, you didn't get to decide. The majority imposed its label on you. And that made you. And so again, when we think about minority majority relationships, when you think about, let's say, a gay person trying to build relationships with straight people, should you do that? Well, it depends a certain amount on the level of oppression Lewin felt. So that's, again, part of that connection is how do we work all that out? This is where he kind of defined the idea that different people are friends in different ways. So in Germany, the German type is the B type on our right. And in Germany, his experience of relationships, and these are from his writings, this graphic, obviously, from resolving social conflicts, differences between US and Germany. In Germany, it was very formal, but once you were through that outer layer, you were really friends. There was a true intimacy. In the United States, you thought you were on level 5, but you weren't intimate at all. And it was a fake relationship. And I feel like I've noticed this in different cultures. Certainly, I'm no expert on international culture, but I've noticed, somebody goes to Japan or whatever, and they kind of spend all week playing golf. And it's like, hey, when are we going to talk business? Well, they're doing the kind of, which order is it? Do I work first and form relationship first? Do I form relationship? Do I work first? So people come to America and think, oh, I got the deal. They'll go home and we'll call them up and say, by the way, we're not doing business. They go, but we got along so well. Well, it's because we have type A where they think you're close, but you're not. So the joke I like to say is this is Lewin's answer to Facebook, right? He's saying it's a are we really a friend? What's a friend, right? So this is kind of that idea. All right. I'm going to go. And then, of course, he talks about what happens when they communicate, right? So he would make these life space drawings. It was called a, I can't say it well with the right German accent. It's kind of a Jordan curve. And so in this case, as you give you a second to look at the labeling, you see this is the analysis or graphical representation of the life space and forces on and group memberships of married people. So you notice that the wife and the husband are both part of the group called M. M is part of the group called FA, which is part of a group called community. Right. And so you see how the individual person has various memberships. Again, you can see why this was important to him. What you were a member of was a direct relationship to your free space. In other words, in Berlin, he lived in a ghetto. And there were only certain places a Jewish person was allowed to walk. When he talked about barriers in life space, he literally had experienced barriers in life space. And so when he saw these symbolically in our relationships, it was kind of really, that's we sort of go, okay, this is actually helpful way of understanding what's happening so that we can improve things, which again was his thing. Our theories are only as good as what they do for people in real life. So he also, I think, he came to the US essentially after there was an announcement by the Nazi government then in 32, late 33, that all the Jews now would no longer be allowed to be professors. You could never be a full professor in any German university. You had to be what's called sort of a German word for a docent. I think the German word was private professor or private teacher. And this is probably what we would call an associate professor. And so Lewin was quite prominent by then. He had already spoken at that big 1929 thing I showed you about. Everybody was talking about him all around the world, but he couldn't be a full professor. He was not surprised by this. He was upset about it. Here's what surprised him, that none of the non-Jewish professors said anything. That's what upset him the most. And so there's this sort of famous letter. He had a non-Jewish German professor named Kohler, He talks about the bird on the flagpole, which is one of the documents that we'll actually be talking about in that full ODN, which is where he's, was thinking, of his love for the fatherland that he went and fought and risked his life for, and that his family died for in conflict. And he said, the bird on the flagpole, he said, maybe democracy is just a bird on a flagpole. We're all talking about it, but it's not actually even there. It's flown away. And so that's when he really started to be so interested in. Yet through all of this, he never lost his sense of humor. He never lost his faith in human beings. And that, I think, is part of OD. I think OD people kind of believe that, what, generally, whatever percentage you want, 99 to whatever, people are good. And if they have a good environment and we have some fairness and justice and love, and after all he and his family went through with his mother and his aunt and his great aunt and his sister, all these people murdered and losing everything, they were somewhat prominent family. On the other side, they had a factory that they lost. But I did find out recently, correction to another story that I got wrong all these years, where my mother's house in Berlin survived the bombing of Berlin and ended up in what became East Germany. And it was a famous architect, who some of you may have heard of, called Bauhaus. And he was the Frank Lloyd Wright of Germany at the time. And he would design both the furniture and the house and everything. And it turned out that a family that was hiding Jews, a German family, bought it. He was able to get money, so many people couldn't sell their asset. They had to escape without everything. And of course, your asset, your house, is probably your biggest asset. And so the house is still there now. I have pictures of it. And my mother, before she passed away, visited it after the unification of Germany. She knocked on the door, and the way she told the story is, at first the occupants, who are descendants of the people who bought it from Kurt Lewin, same family, still there. They said, "Oh, are you upset that we're in your house?" And, no. I just yeah. And there were Lewinians in that town who are, who have made a historical marker at that. Okay, looking at the time, so we're in good shape. Some of this I'm going to go a little faster. I just think this one's funny. Life space of a husband. Okay, so I'll let you look at this for a minute. So a crosshatch was an area of restricted movement. An area with no crosshatch was an area of free movement. And when we talk about empowering employees and engaging employees, when we talk about delegation, when we talk about trying to give people the why and let them come up with the how, we're trying to create space of free movement, I think. And so organizations that are creative and innovative have gotten really good at kind of the right amount of structure and the right amount of freedom and the right amount of ability to fulfill oneself. So Lewin was about this idea of, again, learning and constant appreciation. So the only areas of free movement for this fellow are golf and office life. And by the way, Lewin never took up golf, the American pastime, when he got here. He loved the States, but he never took up golf. So the vacation, the social life, the men's club even is a hatched home management. I'm not quite sure. But anyway, I just kind of enjoy that one. And then you look at the difference between a bachelor, figure A, and the married man, figure B. This one I just think is, again, this was written in 1946, I think this one. Gets a little complicated when we start to do forces now. So you see he now has forces in action, and you can see how overlapping barriers and balances are now creating a stasis, right? So the idea is that we all know in organizations that resist change, like an object in motion versus an object at rest. And so every organization, Lewin would say, is perfectly designed to get exactly what it really wants, or at least resolve the tensions the best way it can. And so I think what a lot of OD is about is resolving these tensions in a better way. What's funny here is the husband wishes to decrease, the wife wishes to increase in the extent of family life versus sex life. The opposite is true. So And I did just hopefully this, people don't get mad at Lewin for this this approach, but I think he's got the sex life there, he's got everything there, which is very funny. Now this one, of course, will go from funny to not funny at all. So this is the idea of, again, and this is Lewin's writing here that you're looking at. The boundaries of the ghetto impose a strict limitation for the bodily locomotion of the Jews. Strong restrictions also limited their social locomotion. Right, so now you see him thinking, he's putting the whole thing in motion now, where we can actually see how the social tensions control the Jewish group, the non-Jewish group, etc. He says, I cannot make use of color here. So again, the idea of color and the rest of it, is pretty wild. And so again, he's explaining why Jews might go into certain professions, and so forth. So now kind of wrapping up, this is probably one of the more famous studies that people have seen. He talked about autocratic, laissez-faire, democratic leadership. Again, he controlled the observers, the definitions they were using, the leaders, the kids. And so what he did is he had kids making paper mache masks. And so what we might say today, we might call autocratic command and control. Though in the ODN definition, there's some ASTD definitions. There's a lot of models out there that use similar language. Laissez-faire, we might today call a hands-off leader. And then democratic, we might call a facilitative leader or a collaborative leader. But this was the language he was using, and it was, of course, very deliberate. And so when he thought about politics and democracy, the autocratic leader required only one decision, that you follow them. That's all you had to know. They were the leader, and the leader is followed. And we still see, that scale. The laissez-faire leader is kind of absent. They weren't negative. They would model the behavior. They would have the leader make the mask as well, and the kids would look around and go, oh, I don't know, he seems to have some status, and let's see what we do. And then the democratic leader would show a finished mask. We now call this having a vision. He would explain why the mask was being made. He would explain all the steps, and he would reward people and praise people when they did well. And then they noticed what would happen when each leader left the room. And I still say this today to leaders: don't tell me what kind of leader you are. Leave, let me watch your team, and I'll tell you what kind of leader you are, right? The autocratic ones would fight. The laissez-faire ones would stop the task. All productivity would disappear. And the democratic ones would reward each other and continue. He did find, to be fair, if you read the studies, they were able to get more productivity out of the autocratic sometimes. So let's be fair to the study there. But again, this is a really helpful way of thinking about a lot of what we do today. So these are, again, some of the Lewinisms. Some of these I find in the work he's done. Some I'm not even sure if they become Lewinisms some other way. I like the one, experience alone does not create knowledge. I shared the last one with you already. Somebody in chat talked about freezing, unfreezing, refreezing. I haven't talked about the change theories today. I haven't talked about a lot of things today. But he did like to work with children, again, because he said when we're young, we're like a flowing river, and then we freeze. And so on. So I think this is sort of a list that we can look at later if you want, but it's kind of a lot of the connections, T groups, national, NTL, that they're the client, not the subject, that there's a thing called dynamics. Field theory we talked about. Again, is it a bad apple, or is it the way you're storing the apples? Systemic change, the idea that we want truth. So that was the other difference between autocratic and democratic. Democratic required truth. And a shift to democratic leadership was essentially a shift from power-based leadership to truth-based leadership. And I still like to talk to leaders about that. How much is just power-based leadership? How much is it really the truth-based leadership? Ultimately, for Lewin, you could change the leader, and the power of the group would survive if it was the right the right approach that you've been taking to the field. Okay. So here's some things we can talk about, and then I'll stop sharing so we can all see each other. How has Lewin's impacted your work? What values does he have that might be relevant to you? How or if might this be inspiring and help us connect to the work that we do? That's it.
Michael, those 3 questions, I think it'd be useful for us to just maybe
Doing
pair
check.
off and talk a little bit about those 3 questions.
Yeah. Do I want to? Can somebody want to?
I'll-
Again, how's it impacted your work? I could try to type them.
Jules, could you quickly type them in the?
Yeah.
Jules has got it.
All right. I'm just going to share it with you again, so you don't have to. So I don't have to read it to you.
Yeah, I got it.
You got them all. Thank you so much, Jules. Okay, so I should stop sharing again.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so you want to go to a small groups for a little while and then come
Yep.
back into a large group and
Yep.
talk about whatever?
Yep.
Oh,
Just-
great.
I'm just going to give you 5 minutes for this, not a long time, just a little time, and then we'll come back and have an all group conversation for the last time we have here.
Could I
And,
suggest trios or
you want
pairs
trios?
of 3, as I like to say?
Whatever you want, you tell me. So,
Let's go trios.
okay,
Something close to trio.
I'll do trios. Let's try this again.
While he's doing that, here's a playful Kurt Lewin in World War One, and that's 1915,
Nice.
and that's the real one. My mom gave me this. Those are photos that old.
Okay.
Here's his little Jewish platoon right there. There's a little Jewish group right there. Okay.
So 5 minutes.
Okay.
Okay. Wendy. That's funny. Gotta leave it alone.
Motion to me. All right.
Okay. Let's see what happened on my screen to Michael. There you are. Okay. So now we just want people to make statements or ask you questions. Fair? Yeah. So two ways to do it. Speak it out loud, or you can type it in the chat and I'll monitor that.
Michael, I have a question. Do you happen to know if Mr. Lewin had a relationship with Robert Hartman?
I'm not sure. I understand the question, but I don't know. Yeah, I hate
Okay.
it when I don't. I hate it when I don't know.
Well, no,
my mom would have known, and it's a name now that I can look at as I'm going through all these papers. So
well,
I don't. I mean, maybe you should explain the question to everybody.
Yeah. So Robert Hartman is called the father of axiology, but it's the study of valuing. But one of well, there are a couple of parallels. Both born in Germany, both left Europe about the same time. Their interest in social influence. Hartman left because he was seen as a resistor to Hitler. And so one of the things he was trying to do, and one of the things that got him nominated for a Nobel Prize, was his curiosity about why is evil so easy to organize and good is not. And so for me, just thinking about some of the Lewinisms and the theories and artifacts you shared just made me think again about Hartman and that they may have had a connection.
No, I appreciate that.
Cool. Somebody else?
Yeah, Porter here. I'd like to jump in with a question about just the terminology. To me, invites some fantastic interventions. The notion of talking to a group about where do you not feel freedom of movement, or where are you restless, and how do you is this restless working for you? Why not? I think these are very interesting and powerful terms that I haven't thought about in terms of any interrogatories with a group or with a leadership.
Lewin would give a baby sugar and then give it sour lemon juice just to see how it would be attracted to or pull from something. I think most OD consultants can tell what's the sugar and what's the lemon juice in a group. And so, David, that's exactly right. When you're working with a leadership team or any team, I guess, actually, certainly, why not? You can kind of observe, I feel like, their approach avoidance, their areas of free movement, their areas of restlessness and anxiety, and these idea of unresolved tensions.
Or what would freedom of movement look like if you had it? I would be curious about it. So you don't think you have free movement. What would it look like if we had free movement in the organization?
Yeah.
What would be different?
Right.
That could show up as who can talk to who, and what you can talk about, and also whether you can eat in this part of the cafeteria. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that could show up.
Yeah, I mean, the last time I saw it in real life coaching a client, just the other day, was in disagreements over who had what power and authority. So I think mostly for Lewin, as you say, Gil, it's about all these things. And the bottom line, though, was about power and authority, free or unfree, autocratic or not, right? And so when you ask people, that's often what they're going to think of. Do I have enough control over what I think is important to me? Or what Lewin might say, can I move towards my goals? Can I be in a positive balance, or am I restricted? Like that life space of the husband or the Jew or the manager or the team member or the project leader or the engineer. What's that engineer's life space at work? And then how much of it, right? It's the same thing. Again, I reference Will Schutz, right? Which I assume many people on the call are familiar, maybe not. So, the idea of the periodic table of relationships and so forth, and needs and wants and inclusion, control, openness. So he's talking about the working out of those authority relationships in a way that allows people to feel respected. So Lewin was asked to intervene on a factory floor. Many people have read this famous example that he wrote up. And nobody was talking to the people on the floor who were having a conflict actually with each other. And the managers were making decisions without allowing those people to communicate and solve their own problem. There were all these rules why they couldn't. One of them was a union rule, right? And so you can fast forward to today. I was working with a hotel use in San Francisco. The area of free movement for a house person or a maid or whatever is pretty intense, meaning not very much. And if I'm a boss and somebody's cleaned the room incorrectly, I have to file a grievance through the union system. I can't just walk up to my colleague and say, oh, by the way, next time you do the bed, this is how we prefer to do them here. And so you don't get, right. So everybody's bound up. And so you have it become, again, not truth-based leadership, but power-based leadership, because they have no other way to do it. Yeah.
Cool. Who else?
I have a question for Gilmore. Gilmore, you've done a deep study of Lewin's work, and I'm really curious to what's shown up for you tonight that is a twist on what you've already known and understood about Lewin, because that might be important to the rest of us.
Well, love attending Michael's talks, and I hesitate to. I'm self-conscious about not becoming a center of attention in the midst of it. So
you have my permission to temporarily be this. I'm kidding, please.
okay, well, that's sweet, Michael. And so Michael, he comes at it more from understanding, looking at the psychology of it, like the space of free movement within the relationships and so on. And so I come from it more from looking at the group dynamics, and then we meet in the middle in places like the leadership styles and so on. So it keeps helping me think about the things. Lewin just covered a lot of territory, and so now one thing in particular out of this is just the thought about power-based versus truth-based is a different way to talk about the leadership stuff than I have done in the past. So I'm intrigued by that and wanting to pay more attention to it.
And that's right in his literature, saying those words. Yeah.
Well, I'm curious about, where he uses those words. I believe it, and I don't know. I'm not familiar
Maybe
with.
I'll find it for you. I think my mom wrote about him writing about it. Anyway,
I think even if it's a paraphrase, it fits his spirit absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, he definitely talks about the autocratic leaders being enemies of the truth.
That's right. This is not a neutral fellow.
Yep. First thing,
if you're not getting that, that is something that I kind of want people to get. This guy had a real point of view about the world, and he was trying to fight another point of view about the world.
Democracy and equality will make the world better.
That's right. And that human beings are valuable.
Mm-hmm.
That human life is valuable. We have a phrase for this in Hebrew, but I mean, it's part of the religion also. And, he didn't, like most Jews, wear his religion. He certainly didn't talk about his heritage or God or whatever. But this was an important part of the Hebrew or the Jewish tradition of valuing life.
Cool. What other questions for Michael? If Wendy.
It may not be as much as a question as much as it's a comment that, standing on the shoulders of giants, other things, I just think of how much Lewin fed so many systems and theories. So for example, when you were showing a slide that showed just the person and and you had these circles around it in different, like being a part of a person's club, right? And different communities and professional organization. It reminded me of the intersectionality that we talk about, right? Mm-hmm. And the beauty in that was it's a visual. And I think that we narrate it with people and we try to listen to people when they talk about the intersectionality of what they might be experiencing and, race and class and, gender and other pieces that make up that beautiful human being. It was a really neat way. And I'm almost imagining doing that at some point with clients, let's draw that out rather than just speak it with a story, but there's some visual work that could be done with that and how powerful it is just to kind of show in a brief way the complexity of someone. So I just am appreciative of seeing that, and it just lives on in other places, and yeah, it's good.
Cool.
Yeah, it's lovely.
You could certainly make one of those drawings and have it be women's range of free movement, and the ability to break the glass ceiling would be a little tiny thing, maybe. I mean, it happens a little more these days, but
yeah. And I think Barbara has a comment there.
Barbara.
You're reminding me of a young woman that we're working with right now we're putting together a change agent panel, and these are younger people working on change in their organizations and trying to learn from their experience. But one of them has talked about being in white space, and this is giving me language to think about what is limiting in white space. You know, how is a person limited in that? And I think this young woman of color is saying, you know, this is the space that I have to work in, and it's limited, and I'm trying to find my way to free it up. So it's really helpful to think about it in that way.
Yeah, it's supposed to be a map. Of that's the way he tried to use it, I think, to identify the places where you wanted to change those forces, right? And how can minority and majority relationships be improved by us understanding the forces against each other. So a lot of times when we do, when we try to get to know each other in a more significant way, that's a Lewinian strategy. But he also struggled, like I said, with there's a line where you don't try to reach out. He talks a long time about, as a Jew, should he try to have German friends? Should he be an example for them? Oh, you know, I know Kurt, he's not a bad guy. And is that a proper way to improve minority-majority relationships based on this belief of intimacy and getting through those inner circles? And he says, sometimes no. So I think the sometimes no is actually a requirement of making the other one work. Having it not be infinite, you know, there's a point where you're going to go, you know what? I'm not against anybody, but I have to be for me because no one else can be for me in the end, in a company, anywhere, in a certain way, right? And so for us, without being against others, that's also kind of that approach. So, you know what I mean? So it's an interesting, it's hard for me sometimes to articulate that survival, you know, is that we insist on surviving.
Are you familiar with any of the work of John Paul around othering? Because it seems like that
I'm not, but that's another,
has relationships to this.
Yeah, and he talked about the minority's relationship to itself. So a lot of what, you know, back to a little bit what Gil was talking about what about the group dynamics and all this, and absolutely we're talking about the group dynamics again, because he felt most of this was not an individual phenomena. Hitler wasn't able to pick the exact right people to be his concentration camp guards. Anyone he picked could become a concentration, essentially. And so it is the group, and the group imposes these things on both the minority member and the majority member. And we were talking in our breakout about one of his beliefs was that the self-esteem, one of his experiences through action learning in the famous Connecticut, black and white, the African-American and white relationships work that he did in Connecticut there, was the discovery that raising the self-esteem of both parties was needed, meaning the self-esteem of the oppressive majority needed improving. And that a lot of the behavior was a overreaction to their own, you know, this is sort of a tough humanity to feel for the oppressive majority if you're the oppressed minority. So I know this isn't, you know, I don't appreciate it sometimes if you experience this, you know, I'm not saying it's easy, but that's where he was heading ultimately, was improving the self-esteem of the majority as well.
He certainly was empathetic with everyone in the system.
Exactly, right, because of field theory. He said, look, the system is exerting its. So I'll ask the group, and of course open to any other question too, but I'm just curious. So regardless of the level of knowledge you had coming into our little meeting, where do you see the connections between the work I've talked about here and the work you do? Do you see those connections? What might be those connections? Any connection of any kind?
Julie said everywhere.
I mean, I guess I'll share my current,
I'm fine. People can think. Silence is okay.
Okay, great.
No, go ahead, Jules. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off. I didn't know you. There you go.
I probably was speaking more of a place to fill in the silence. So I like that.
Yeah, I'm cool.
Well, I mean, if I really thought we talked about in our breakout a few things. One of them was the management style and sort of like looking at autocratic, the democratic and everything, and how that still hasn't changed much. And you can tell that even in different workplaces. And then the other thing I brought up was the failure approach versus success learning. It was really interesting because even though that was an old theory, I feel like it's still there. There's so many people that want to put you down or make you feel bad when you don't do something correct, but that's not, I mean, there's studies and everything that show that that's not the right way to go about it. So anyway, that's just my input.
Sure.
So one thing for me that stood out and was this idea that he was surprised that the non-Jewish professors didn't say anything. I think I had a story in my head about after the Holocaust, Lewin was surprised that good people could stand by and let bad things happen. I don't know if that's true, but this resonated, this idea of the surprise at people not saying anything. And I think in a way, at least my efforts around diversity and inclusion are related to getting people to say things, when they see something, to say something. So that's, I think, definitely a principle that I've tried to adopt. And I was curious, Michael, if you have done any tea groups yourself and if they've had an impact on you.
Well, I secretly did a tea group at Stanford, so they didn't, like they would give a damn. But anyway, I thought I'd not tell them, so whatever. And so I did a tea group at Stanford. And then I did a tea group in Connecticut with my mother. Which was crazy. So I haven't done them much. It's not like some practitioners here do them regularly, but yeah, I have. Oh, I didn't drag it out today, but a lot of times when I do this presentation, it's just here. I won't grab it right at a time, but I have a T-shirt, and what it is, it's from a German conference, and it's all these little groups of T's on a shirt, and so it's a Lewin pun shirt of all things, and maybe I'll get a photo of it and I'll send it to you guys. But yes, it's a T-shirt of tea groups. It's my mom and I got a chuckle.
Like it.
Barbara, do you have another question?
I do. You mentioned, Michael, that you were looking through some papers. What are the papers that you're looking through?
Well, I didn't realize that my mom had a number of these old videos and movies and papers, and a lot of the papers are things, that she wrote about his work, and then work that he did. So, these are her notes about that little video I showed you of us playing on the waves. Wow. And she talks about little Mikey and Franz and the Manessa family. So I'm working with a number of people that have written books about Lewin, some of them only in German, they're not translated. I've got people kind of all over the world that are talking to me and asking me questions. And so then I go into the papers. There's a number of really good archives all over the world. I don't have some special, whatever, but I do have some access to some things that I think are pretty cool and that we're trying to dig a lot more into.
Interesting.
Where was he in Iowa? Was he in Iowa?
He was in Iowa when my mother was a little Jewish girl in Iowa from Berlin. At one point, one of her schoolmates asked to see her horns. And full on meant it. Like, didn't even think it was kind of weird or mean, just like, can we see your horns? Part of what happened was they were not letting Jewish families in. And so I'll keep this one quick. They basically had a rule, you had to put up a $5,000 bond. I looked it up. That's about 80 grand today. So you had to put up a $5,000 bond. You had to sign a thing that said you never take any kind of government assistance. I think Trump had that rule for a while, just now. and you had to have a job already. And so he came to Cornell, but it was temporary. They were trying to stay in the US. They were afraid of getting kicked out. And so it was University of Iowa, of all places, in the home economics department that had one spot that they were allowed to give to one Jewish family per year. So this university saved one family a year, and there were hundreds of schools that did it. And my mother's family and Kurt Lewin's family was one of those families. He tried to go to Harvard. He tried to go to Yale. And there's a quote about some communication by telegraph or whatever between the people at Harvard and Yale. They use a derogatory term for a Jew. They call him a perfect little you-know-what. They said, I hear he even uses his children in his experiments.
And these were eminent psychologists.
That's correct. Yeah, you know the reference. I think I've showed you, you've seen the reference, Gil. And so my grandfather was kicked out of Harvard and Yale, but Iowa took him. And so we survived. We lived instead of perishing.
Is it?
I have family in Hong Kong. I have family in South America. I have family all over. The Lewin family is all over the world. There are Lewins.
Yeah. Apparently, there's our archives. You probably looked at them in Iowa. Is that right? There's archives.
I know only of their existence. I have not looked at them. My mother sent a number of things there. There's also things at Cornell. There's also things at University of Berlin where he got his degree.
Because Richard Schmuck was the one that told me about the Iowa archives. I don't know if you know who he is, but he was a Lewin scholar also.
I don't know that name either. Again, I feel like, I'm humbled, certainly.
He wrote books about Lewin, basically relating to the educational system. So he was a colleague of my father's, Robert Crosby.
Yes, and I don't know if everybody knows about his connection and so forth, but there are all these wonderful connections. That's right. And I know Wendy she's got a picture of Edie and Charlie on her office desk right there. So I was talking about Edie and Charlie before. So yeah, it's always just, it's, very, it's sweet and very nice. And I'm sorry, my mom's not here still. I'm just looking in chat if there's anything. Oh, thank you, Jules. So I would direct people to look at Jules's comments as well as Wendy's and Milgram's work, B.F. Skinner, the infamous Skinner boxes. That's right. Yeah, and yeah.
I don't know, isn't raising children an active learning, action learning in general? Right? Well, that didn't work. What am I going to do tomorrow, right?
That's right.
Oh my gosh, we're all putting our kids through experiments.
Well, and again, today I was talking about action learning with a client because she needs to let the team solve itself more. And that's an essential definition. Action learning isn't just, as you say, right? It's also who's doing it.
No.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, it fits with Lean. It fits with Six Sigma. It fits a lot of places.
Would help all those things.
Yeah. Yeah. And then again, when you put the famous equation, B is a function of P and E, the person and their environment. So I used to present that in such a way that sometimes people go, well, that's a great excuse. I'll just blame the culture. No, there's a P in there. The P stands for the person, but what's the choice is the question. How extreme are you willing? Right? Are you, here's where we go from Lewin to Stoic, the philosopher. I'll live by my values even if it kills me. So if you're put in an environment that's a toxic environment, what do? And that's the question of leadership if you're in that role. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, you guys. It's very fun.
Thank you, Michael. This has been great. It's honored to have you present for us. Thank you so much.
All right. Very good.
think I'm becoming a groupie. This is like my third, so.
You're not stalking me. I'm starting to get a little worried. Welcome anytime, sir, especially if you're well behaved like you were today.
The space of free movement.
Well, I don't want to give you too much free movement. I'm going to be a little autocratic. Thank you so much, everybody. Stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you a lot. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay. Bye, you guys. Let's check in later, Chris.
Okay.
I'll get on your calendar. Okay.
Sure.
Bye-bye.
Bye.